What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the Health is Hard podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Matt Eichler, and I'm here to help you cut through the noise and find the strategies that actually work for building a stronger, healthier, more resilient you. As a seasoned chiropractor, fitness junkie, and founder of Element X Health and Fitness, I've seen firsthand how confusing and overwhelming the health and fitness landscape can be. That's why I've made it my mission to simplify complex concepts, bust myths, and provide you with actionable tips you can start using today. Each week, we'll dive into topics like optimizing movement, building muscle, bouncing back from injuries, managing pain, managing your mindset, and so much more. Whether you're looking to level up your nutrition game, fine-tune your fitness routine, or just feel better in your own skin, Health is Hard is here for it. I'll do my best to make even the most challenging topics engaging and relatable. I'm hoping you'll be learning, laughing, and leveling up your health every episode. All right, let's dive in. Let the brain gains begin. Remember, the information/opinions provided in these podcasts/videos is/are for entertainment and educational purposes only, and is not intended as a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
All right, Health is Hard, episode 7. We're back, baby, and we're talking about nutrition. And by no means am I a nutrition expert. I wouldn't claim that I am. I'm not a registered dietitian. I wouldn't call myself a nutrition guru. However, I do know a thing or two. Now, I'm a chiropractor by trade. However, I've gone through a ton of different nutritional trainings, post-grad, post-doc. I have become a functional medicine practitioner. However, I don't actively practice that a ton right now. However, I do have every intention to get into more and more functional medicine treatment modalities and practice in the near future. However, I feel like there's just so many common sense interventions that just get lost in the sauce in the modern nutritional landscape. Over the course of the next few episodes, we're going to go into more nutritional advice. And tonight is going to be mostly just kind of some sobering statistics about the state of nutrition in this country and kind of globally as well. It's just a mess out there, and it's hard for people to get good information these days. So without further ado, we're going to dive right in. I named the episode tonight, What the Fork, with the subtitle, The Status of Nutrition-Related Health in the Modern World. And What the Fork is actually the name of a book that I'm working on right now. I've been working on it for a couple of years, but I've been sidetracked with a number of different projects, and I've kind of cut portions of the book up into nutritional guides for clients and for patients and all these different things. So I'm going to try to actually finish that book up, but tonight is going to be almost like the introduction of the book, almost with just all these different statistics. And it's going to really open your eyes as far as so many of the nutritional battles that we have to deal with day in and day out, and that the country is dealing with as far as nutrition related health issues. Like I said, I'm a chiropractor, but when I was young, I became somewhat obsessed with nutrition early on. I remember seeing my dad as a kid choke down a whole handful of vitamins every day, and I was always kind of intrigued as to why was he doing that and how was it helping him. I feel super blessed to come from a family that's always been health minded, and they've always tried to emphasize eating better and doing the best that they could with the knowledge that they had. And some of that is definitely self-taught within the family. And that happens to be the case for a lot of people these days, because we just don't get a whole lot of nutrition information. I think it should be mandatory in schooling and school and your basic biology classes and basic chemistry classes. In high school, you should learn a little bit about what you're putting in your body and how it affects your biochemistry, your physiology. And I think it's a sad situation that it really is not taught much at all. Your average general population patient knows almost nothing about nutrition. However, there are some common sense things that I think most people understand. There's so much stuff out there. And I'm going to try to create this bridge between a lot of the science and also the practical application, but also just common sense in the world of nutrition. So let's do it. And also tonight, I'm going to be looking at my computer a lot. There's so many statistics here. There's no way I can pack these into my brain. So you're going to see me referring to my notes here quite a bit. So pardon me on that. But tonight's going to be one of those episodes where I'm almost reading a lot of statistics because it's just insane. So one of the main problems, like I was just discussing there, is information overload. There's over 100 popular diets out there right now. There's so much marketing hype, and there's so much, let's say, corporate influence, even government subsidies and whatnot that influence what we're eating. I'm going to try to break a lot of those down tonight so you have an understanding as to just, where a lot of the information is coming from and how it can get skewed, and how a lot of times common sense just goes out the window. We are so confused about what we should be eating. All the different ideas around veganism and vegetarianism and plant-based versus animal-based and carnivore versus keto. And it can just be a little madness out there. And then you'll have people that are like, hardcore anti-carb zealots. And then you'll have, hardcore anti-meat zealots. And it's just me sitting here explaining it is enough to make your head spin a little bit. The episode goals here tonight are going to be, we're going to merge some perspectives and deliver some clear, actionable nutrition advice after we get through just why it's so dang convoluted and what's wrong. So like I said, tonight might be a little bit more of kind of a sobering type of episode. But I really want to bridge the gap between scientific research, common sense, practical application, and just, sustainable habits and patterns and things that people can do to basically clean up their diet, clean up their health, and really just improve their quality of life. I really believe that by the end of these next two episodes, you will know more about nutrition than most doctors. Okay. And I'm not even joking in the least bit when I say that, because most doctors really aren't trained in nutrition much at all. And neither are chiropractors. Just want to get that out of the way. I don't feel like in my traditional education, got a whole lot more nutrition than your average doctor. But I did do an exercise science bachelor's degree. And then I did a bunch of postdoc, or I guess then I went on to chiropractic college. Chiropractic college gets as much, if not more, nutrition information than your average medical school student does. And then, like I said, I did functional medicine training and all that. So I'm definitely way beyond your average doctor when it comes to nutritional knowledge.
Hey, it's Dr. Matt. Are you looking to make some moves towards better health and fitness and do so in an effective, efficient, and sustainable way? I'm excited to introduce to you Element X Personal Transformations, my premium online fitness coaching program designed to help you crush whatever fitness goals you may have, whether it's slapping on some muscle, building some strength, actually losing that stubborn body fat that keeps coming and going and coming and going, recover from a nagging injury, or all the above. Now, what sets the EXPT program apart is its personalized approach. You'll start with a 3-call intro process with me, Dr. Matt, personally, each lasting 30 to 45 minutes. During these calls, we'll dive deep into your unique needs, preferences, goals, and whatever else you want to talk about to create a customized fitness situation that's perfect for you. No more guesswork. No more one-size-fits-all approaches. With EXPT, you'll receive expert guidance, support, and accountability every step of the way. I've done my best to create a program that puts a chiropractor, physical therapist, and personal trainer in your pocket, or at least on standby. We'll work together to optimize your nutrition, training, recovery, and mindset to help you achieve sustainable, life-changing results. So if you're ready to do all that, head to the link in the description, complete the quick 5-minute coaching application. Not everybody's a candidate, but this quick application gives me all the details to let you know up front if it's a match or not. But don't wait, spots are filling up, and I can only handle so many clients at a time because of the detailed, personalized approach. So I hope to chat with you soon.
First topic here is America's health crisis, big picture. And I know first few episodes of this podcast, we went through a lot of that. I talked a lot about stress and just the physical, chemical, emotional stressors and how much those impact our day-to-day, how we develop chronic lifestyle-related conditions, and how those are the primary issue in today's modern American health landscape. So first thing we got to talk about is the obesity epidemic. And I know we've talked about this a lot in the first few episodes, but you can't really hash out a bigger problem in this country than the obesity epidemic. And really, it's somewhat of a modern phenomena. I mean, it's really gone bonkers in the last, I'm going to say 50 years, maybe even 40 years. You'll see those pictures on social media of like the beaches in like the 70s, and everybody was like fit or thin, at least not super overweight. And then you compare that to the pictures of the beaches in the 2020 and beyond, and it's like, holy cow, everybody's overweight. And that's because pretty much everybody is. And I'm going to talk about some of those statistics here. Just a couple things that might blow you away right away. The average American eats 29 pounds of French fries every year, 23 pounds of pizza, and 24 pounds of ice cream every year. Okay. So think about that. I said pounds. not ounces. I said pounds. All right. And some current statistics here. 74% of American adults are overweight. 74%, 3/4. All right. Wild. 42.4% of American adults are obese with a BMI of over 30. Now, of course, BMI statistics, we've talked about that quite a bit too. They don't necessarily account for lean mass, muscle mass. I know my BMI is like 28 or 29, and I probably have like 13 or 14% body fat max. So, sometimes the BMI is not the best measure, but it's a good general overall measure. And 9.2% of American adults are severely obese, which means a BMI of over 40. Now, if you just Google what a BMI over 40 looks like, you're going to see that number is a pretty good cutoff for saying, okay, that person is fat. I don't think we can really be politically correct when it comes to obesity. I understand not shaming people and not trying to make people feel bad, but at the same time, this is a huge health crisis that just has to be addressed. We can't just enable horrific health choices that contribute to obesity and worsening of the obesity epidemic, and just what that's going to do to the health system. It's just going to go off the rails. Okay. When you think about some of the costs that are related to obesity and chronic disease in this country, we can't be politically correct about it. You just can't, because we're never going to get anywhere that way when we enable it. So historical context, in 1980, the obesity rate was 15%. Okay. So in 4 decades, the obesity rate's gone up 183%. So in 40 years, it's gone up almost 200%. We got to figure out what's going on. And I think it's been really interesting to see over the last couple of days. We've seen a lot of the, I think there was a bunch of meetings on Capitol Hill where we had a handful of pretty decent nutrition gurus they're trying to shed some light on this. And I love to see that. Casey Means have been all over a bunch of podcasts lately. They're fantastic resources as far as understanding the inner workings of what's going on with our food and marketing and corporate influence and all of that. I definitely suggest checking out any of the podcasts that they've been on. They have a book together. Callie and Casey Means is a brother-sister duo. The sister is a Stanford-educated medical doctor. She was a surgeon. She just quit medicine because she just found out she wasn't helping her patients the way she thought she was, and she became kind of disgusted with the system and really wanted to find a way to make a more lasting change or impact. And I can totally relate. I really feel some of that weight on me, even as a chiropractor. I can crack backs all day, get people feeling better to a certain degree, but if we don't address some of these underlying health issues, my effectiveness with my treatments is just very limited. So we have to start to get to some of the root causes of what's going on here and address those, because if we don't, a lot of well-intended physicians and their efforts are just, ineffective when we're not addressing some of these things. So back to some more context here, the projections by 2030, 50% of American adults will be obese. And that's crazy. 50%. So, and nearly 25%, nearly a quarter will be severely obese. And that severely obese was that BMI of 40 or more. It's hard to even imagine what things are going to look like if we continue at these kind of trends. So we got to make some changes. I love the fact that RFK Jr. has been getting involved. People can have their opinions on him. I think he's fantastic with his intention and making sure that we're protecting people from the financial interests of these big corporations that tend to dominate a lot of our food and medicine and whatnot. So the health consequences of all those numbers we just threw out there are vast. We're dealing with obesity. We're also dealing with a radical increase in the chance of chronic disease. Now let's just take a look here. So type 2 diabetes is one of the main chronic diseases that I've really taken an interest in the last few years, because it's just such a problem. And you don't want diabetes. I remember growing up not knowing much about it, didn't really understand it, even through chiropractic college, didn't really put the puzzle pieces together about how much of a problem diabetes is, or type 2 diabetes specifically. And type 2 diabetes is a lifestyle related preventable illness. It's 100% reversible with lifestyle. It's been done probably millions of times, but it's also a 100% lifestyle related onset. When it comes to type 2 diabetes, if you're obese, you have 80 times higher the risk of developing type 2 diabetes. 80 times. You really want to almost guarantee you have diabetes, you allow yourself to become obese. And I know it's more nuanced and difficult than just allowing yourself to become obese. I know some people, are like, I just can't believe how you can let yourself get that fat. And I'm like, there's so many different things at play. It comes down to our upbringing, our nature and our nurture, our genetics do play a role 100%, but most of diabetes and chronic disease and obesity is nurture, not nature. Okay. We are not designed to be obese. It's lifestyle related. If you're obese, you also have a 28% increased risk of heart disease, and you also have an increased risk of certain cancers. Obesity is associated with 13 different types of cancer, and just your overall quality of life is wrecked when you're obese. Let's not get it twisted. When you're obese, your quality of life dramatically goes down. Also, something a little bit more in my wheelhouse, obesity increases your risk of osteoarthritis 4.55 times if you're a male and 4.72 times if you're a female. When you're obese, a lot more pressure on the joints. Adipose tissue, which is fat tissue, basically is inflammatory in nature. So sometimes I'll have patients that'll lose 10 pounds and they can't believe how much better they feel. And it's like, well, that 10 pounds, let's say somebody weighs 250 pounds and they go down to 240. Did they take that much more pressure off their joints? Maybe a little bit, but not much. I think it's more the inflammation that's constantly being generated. And when you start to get some of that body fat off, so many of your health markers improve. It's unbelievable, regardless of how you did it. Now, I would say if you just cut it off, that might not work. But when you lose it, when you lose some body fat, your health markers improve, and it's almost across the board they improve. So the important part is getting that body fat off. And of course, once you have body fat on, it's a whole lot harder to get it off and keep it off. Diet statistics are really bad as far as like people sustaining the weight loss. So we'll talk more about that at some point here, but we're just going to keep on going. So like I said, osteoarthritis, radically increases 4.5 times, 4.7 times if you're obese, and each 5-point increase in your BMI increases your risk of knee arthritis or osteoarthritis of the knees by 35%. And specifically, severe obesity is associated with a 6.5 to a 13.7 year decrease in your life expectancy. So it's clearly a problem, and I don't think anybody's unaware of that. But the more we ignore it and just enable it, and things are only going to get worse. So let's take a look at the economic impact here. So in 2019, there was an estimated annual medical cost of obesity in the United States is $173 billion with a B, billion dollars. Okay. Medical costs for adults who had obesity were $1,800, almost $2,000 higher than the medical costs of people within a normal healthy weight range. Right. According to another study here published in the Journal of Preventive Medicine in 2020, if obesity trend, this is a quote directly from the study, if obesity trends continue, the U.S. obesity rate is projected to reach 48.9% by 2030, 50%, pretty close. And those estimated costs with obesity are estimated to go up into the $1.something trillion. All right. Overall, that would be economic impact, healthcare costs, all those kind of things. But $1 trillion, when you try to sit and imagine how much money $1 trillion is, it will make your head spin. $1,000 billion is unbelievable. Just $1 billion is unbelievable. Okay. But sometimes, we have things that, like football stadiums get built and it's like, oh, this thing's $2 billion. It's like, oh my gosh, just the amount of money that is staggering. But here's another study here. In the Journal of Occupational and Environmental Medicine in 2017, they estimated the total obesity-related absenteeism, so like work absenteeism, ranged from $8.65 billion per year up to $14.34 billion per year. So you can just see the amount of money that this epidemic costs us. And when you think about the resources that are poured into it, it's just, you almost want to hang your head because you're just like, wow, this is going off the rails at a breakneck speed, and who's footing the bill? I guess we can just keep printing money and just pretend that we can afford this kind of thing, but eventually this is going to catch up to us when it comes to human resources and being able to provide treatment for chronic conditions and whatnot, kind of like almost off the cliff, and we're just waiting to hit the ground. A lot of people, and I still think a lot of health advice and even medical advice out there tries to pin everything on genetics, and your family history really dictates how you're going to live the rest of your life. And it's just not accurate. 84% of the risk of chronic disease is not genetic, at least 84%. I'd say maybe even more than that. And it's more related to your environment and your behavior. So you can't blame your parents. I know you can't pick your parents, but you also can't blame your parents for a lot of the health conditions that maybe you have that maybe they had as well. A lot of times it's not picked up in your genes, it's picked up in the behaviors and the habits and all these things that you learn from your parents. At a certain point, once you're an adult, it's your turn to learn how to live and how to best make health decisions and choices and develop certain habits to live better and have a higher quality life. And that goes for passing those habits on to your kids. We just have to take more responsibility in what we're doing with our health, and we have to prioritize it more, because though there will be a day that comes where you have to prioritize it. To end that topic real quick, I love this quote, and I don't know, I've heard this all over the place, but our genes load the gun, but our lifestyles pull the trigger. And that couldn't be more true, right? Our genes load the gun, but our lifestyles pull the trigger. And that goes for all kinds of different ailments, health related conditions, but also so many other things too. Just think about your habits and how they dictate your life. I love the quote. One of my early mentors, the guy that really kind of convinced me to be a chiropractor, would always say, it's time for you to take your health into your own hands. And that was like his little tagline, and I loved it. I've kind of stolen it and taken it, and I use it a lot too. We want to put our health in everybody else's hands. We're not doctors. I can't make those decisions. Absolutely, you can. And 84% of disease and chronic ailments is because of what you do day in and day out. So you got to take your own health in your own hands. I love that. Shout out to Dr. Karras up in Michigan. He's a stud. So heart disease and cancer. Heart disease and cancer account for nearly 50% of the U.S. deaths annually. All right. It's about 1.2 million deaths each year from just those two diseases. And guess what? Diet is a major modifiable risk factor in both of those. Okay. We'll come back around to those eventually. So another chronic ailment, chronic pain. Okay. Like I said, this is more my wheelhouse. But chronic pain is pain lasting more than 3 months, a specific pain lasting more than 3 months. Affects 50 million U.S. adults. Another major modifiable risk factor with chronic pain is chronic inflammation. But the economic burden of chronic pain is estimated at $560 to $635 billion annually in direct medical costs, lost productivity, and also disability programs. So that's a big chunk of money. Okay, that's $500 billion in lost productivity, healthcare costs, and those kind of things. So that also ties into some of those numbers that we were talking about earlier. So just quickly, we'll go into a lot of these recommendations later, but some of the dietary factors that influence chronic pain and inflammation are things like omega-3 fatty acids, getting more omega-3s, balancing out that omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acid ratio, antioxidants that are found in like vegetables and fruits and all kinds of plant foods, really important for reducing oxidative stress, which is a contributor to inflammation. Vitamin D is another one. When we're vitamin D deficient, we're much more likely to have an increased pain sensitivity. And I sometimes equate vitamin D is when your vitamin D is within a decent range. I would say, just to throw some numbers out here, like I said, we're going to hammer this more later. If your vitamin D is within that range of like 50 to 80, which they say deficiency is under 30. I think deficiency is basically under 50. If you're sub 50 or so, you sometimes will see some conditions related to vitamin D deficiency, and not just like the stuff with your bones and calcium and whatnot. It plays a huge role in so many different things like your immune system. But like I said, if vitamin D is a huge modifiable factor, if we aren't in a decent range with our vitamin D, we have increased pain sensitivity a lot of the time. Arthritis, 58.5 million U.S. adults, 23.7% of the population have arthritis. I'd argue that it's probably more because a lot of people have arthritis and it's not really symptomatic. Matter of fact, most people do after a certain age. They have some degree of arthritis. This is kind of a normal aging process. However, there are many modifiable risk factors and things like previous traumas and lifestyle, sedentary lifestyle, movement, exercise, nutrition, all those things play a role in the advancement of arthritis from what I've experienced in my 10-year career to this point. But arthritis is the leading cause of work disability in the United States. And, low back pain and depression are probably the two main things, but low back pain heavily blamed on arthritis all the time. So that's probably where that fits in there. By 2040, they're estimating that 78.4 million U.S. adults are projected to have doctor-diagnosed arthritis. In just 15 years, it's estimated to go up another 20 million people, which is bonkers. So it's just crazy. Next chronic disease we're going to dive into here is diabetes. Like I said, diabetes is something that's really grabbed my attention in the last 5 to 10 years. And I really feel like one of my main missions is to help people with this prevention of type 2 diabetes development, but also trying to reverse and minimize the complications health-wise of having type 2 diabetes or developing type 2 diabetes. So let's look at some statistics on diabetes here. So 37.3 million Americans, 11.3% of the population, had diabetes in 2021. 96 million American adults have pre-diabetes. 96 million. That's like a third, maybe a little bit less than a third of American adults have pre-diabetes. The global prevalence of diabetes has increased from 4.7% in 1980 to 8.8% in recent years. So it's almost doubled in 40 years. So like I said, breakneck speed increase in all these chronic diseases, diabetes being one of them. It's amazing to me that we don't have the media every night talking about these things. Every night this should be hammered into our heads that this is a problem and that we need to do things to fix it. But instead, we're all caught up in all the political atmosphere and all the wars here and there. And don't get me wrong, all these things are important. However, I don't think there's another more important issue in this country, in the world, than the health status of us humans. I mean, we're digging our own grave because of just how sick we are becoming. I'm always saying in a lot of my little catchphrases that Americans just keep getting sicker and thicker. So I thought it'd be interesting to do kind of like a little timeline or a little history lesson to just understand what's happened with our food system and just kind of some important key things that kind of went down that really just expedited us towards this situation that we're in now. So I'm just going to be referring to my computer here a little bit so I can explain this. But so some early innovations, and then I'm going to kind of bring us to present day with some significant events and just kind of how they molded the landscape a little bit. So in 1810, canning was invented by Nicholas Appert, and this enabled long-term food preservation. And then we're going to fast forward to 1856. Gail Borden invents condensed milk, and it's a shelf-stable dairy alternative. So now we can use these dairy alternatives in a lot of processed foods. But then 1862, Louis Pasteur develops pasteurization that improves food safety. 1869, the first transcontinental railroad is completed in the U.S., and this revolutionizes food transportation and distribution in the country. Now, into 1876, Heinz ketchup is introduced, and this marks kind of the beginning of mass-produced condiments and then also a lot of other foods as well. 1878, the development of refrigerated rail cars allows for long-distance transportation of perishable foods. And then now we're into 1886. Coca-Cola is invented in 1886, initiating the era of mass-produced soft drinks. And here's where we really go off the rails, okay? So after the soft drinks, now we've got John Harvey Kellogg and C.W. Post introduced breakfast cereals in 1890, or around the 1890s. In 1899, Clarence Birdseye observes flash freezing in the Arctic, and this leads to him inventing the quick freezer, or the quick freezing of foods. 1901, the first U.S. sugar beet factory opens, increasing domestic sugar production. In 1903, the first automated bottle blowing machine is invented, enabling mass production of glass bottles for food and beverages. 1906, the Pure Food and Drug Act is passed in the U.S., marking the beginning of federal food regulation. So that brings us into the 1900s. Now, this next whole category of evolution here, I'm going to call the rise of convenience and processing. And this is kind of the 1920s to the 1960s. So in the 1920s, Clarence Birdseye invents that quick freezer, which preserves nutrients better than canning can. And then around the 1950s to 1960s, TV dinners are popularized by Swanson and Sons. And this introduces this ready-to-eat meal option where you can just pull it out the freezer and then you can heat it up some way. And this really started to create a dramatic shift. But by 1955, the average American soda consumption had risen to 10.8 gallons a year. So you can see how this is starting to lay the groundwork for where we're at now. So now we get into like the 1960s, okay? And I'm going to call this the technology boom, the great fat deception, and sugar and edible food-like substance surge, okay? This is kind of the 1960s to the 2010s. So in 1958, the Food Additives Amendment is passed, introducing the generally recognized as safe, or the GRAS concept, which allows a ton of additives to be put into the food supply without a ton of rigorous review. The whole generally recognized as safe situation really allows for us to kind of have this collective agreement that things are okay in the food supply without super rigorous studying or long-term kind of trials and understanding what's happening with some of these chemicals or preservatives and additives in our food. So here's where things get really interesting. In 1967, the sugar industry, through the Sugar Research Foundation, paid 3 Harvard scientists to publish a review in the New England Journal of Medicine. This review basically downplayed the link between sugar and heart disease while emphasizing the role of saturated fat in heart disease. This influential paper shaped the direction of nutrition research for decades, and this led to an emphasis on controlling fat consumption and understanding that fat is probably the problem versus sugar consumption. In 1967, that same year, concurrently, the home microwave ovens are introduced. This revolutionizes cooking and reheating, and this further increases the popularity of like ready-made, easy to prepare, quick, just zap them in the microwave type meals, which are often high in sugar and a bunch of other chemical preservatives and additives that extends the shelf life and allows you to just keep them in the freezer or keep them somewhere where you can just all of a sudden quickly microwave them and boom, you're good to go. So, and then also in the 1960s, somewhere in the 1960s, the Green Revolution begins, and this increases crop yields through the use of synthetic fertilizers and pesticides. So now we're into the 1970s and 1980s. I'm going to call this the rise of high fructose corn syrup, low-fat diets, and food additives. So somewhere in the 1970s, high fructose corn syrup is introduced, and it's introduced as like a cheaper sugar alternative. And since then, its use in U.S. food products has increased by 1,000% between 1970 and just 1990. I'm sure it's even higher now. In 1977, the U.S. Senate Select Committee on Nutrition and Human Needs, led by George McGovern, publishes the Dietary Goals for the United States, recommending a reduction in fat intake, and this marks the beginning of that low-fat era, kind of that low-fat craze where everything was, trying to minimize fat, and fat is the evil, and fat is bad. So by the time we get to the 1980s, the food industry has responded and has replaced a ton of the fat in a lot of the foods with better, lower fat options, which tends to replace the fat with a ton of refined carbohydrates and sugars. And, now that we can market it as low fat or fat free, we think it's healthier. This is the 1980s, okay? And this is still kind of pervasive today. You'll still see this all over the place still. And you'll still have a lot of doctors that are saying, oh, be careful with the fat, be careful with the fat. Now, of course, there is some research that shows some potential health issues with saturated fat consumption, but it's nuanced and it's not as understood as we thought it was then, okay? And of course, we didn't really think it was. We just had to listen to the science of the experts who were somewhat manipulating the narrative because of the payoffs between the sugar industry trying to minimize the connection between sugar and blame it all on fat. So now we're into the 1980s and the 1990s, and now I call this the boom in vegetable oils, GMOs, and even more pesticides, okay? So just a couple bullet points here. Soybean oil consumption increases by over 1,000% from 1909 to 1999. I think in 1909, basically vegetable oil consumption was almost zero. Okay, now it increases 1,000% by 1999. The use of other seed oils like corn, canola, safflower increases dramatically. By 1994, the first genetically modified food, the flavor saver tomato, is introduced. So now we've got GMO foods, okay? By 1996, Monsanto introduces Roundup Ready soybeans, genetically engineered to withstand the glyphosate herbicide. By the late 1990s, glyphosate use begins to increase dramatically, 1,500% between 1995 in 2015. So now we're into the 1990s, into the 2000s, right? I know I just went into 2015 there, but just this general era of the 1990s through the 2000s, I'm just going to call it a sugar peak. So between 1958 and 2010, about 1,000 affirmed GRAS, or generally recognized as safe, notifications are submitted to the FDA, many for new food additives. Between 1977 and 2012, Americans decreased their fat intake from 42% to 34%, following the dietary guidelines. However, during the same period, obesity rates more than double. So there's a problem there, right? We decreased our fat consumption, but obesity doubled. We should have been scratching our heads right there. So real quick, let's rewind back for just a second, back into the 70s, and talk about high fructose corn syrup, the sugar substitute, right? It's super prevalent in soft drinks. There's two different kinds that's primarily used here. There's the kind that's prevalent in soft drinks, which is the HFC S55, and then in processed foods, it's the HFC S42. So just a quick global perspective here. The U.S. consumption of the high fructose corn syrup and sucrose, so sucrose is basically just table sugar, are used about equally, okay? So high fructose corn syrup is used just as often as table sugar is used, okay? But internationally, most countries rely on sucrose. About 90% of their stuff, their brands, their processed foods and whatnot, like Coca-Cola and Pepsi, those sugary soft drinks, are using sucrose. 90% internationally are using sucrose, but in the US, it's 50-50. And it's kind of interesting to understand, why is high fructose corn syrup used so much more commonly in the US versus other countries? Fast forward, we start to figure out some of the health implications of high fructose corn syrup, and we see that studies can show that it may worsen hyperlipidemia or blood fatty acid profiles within our blood. It may adversely affect liver stress. The fructose is hard on the liver. And then also it may be affecting insulin sensitivity and metabolic health. However, I don't think that they drew any dramatic conclusions at that time to say, hey, this stuff's not good, because, or even if they did, I'm not sure if they did or not, but even if they did, the consumption and the use of it has not slowed down much at all. So even though all this is happening, by the year 2000, soda consumption has reached its peak of 53 gallons per person annually, which is a 491% increase from 1955. And right around about this same time, the average omega-6 to omega-3 ratio in the American diet shifts from like 1-to-1, sometimes people say 4-to-1, but now it's on average 16-to-1 to like 25 to even, I've seen like 50-to-1. Okay, so now we've got this super high ratio, or I guess this super crazy ratio of omega-6 to omega-3s in our standard diet. And that's what we know leads to inflammation, inflammatory processes. The seed oils are a problem because of their ability to oxidize and all these things that are not going to be good when we consume them. So that kind of brings us to present day. And, this whole sugar industry study thing is nefarious, if I was to say the least about it. But that didn't really come to light till about 2016. In 2016, there was actually like an admission. I don't know if it was like declassified documents or what happened, but there was basically this admission that they had kind of falsified the data, or kind of at least shifted the focus from sugar and its potential issues with heart disease to fat. It's been like admitted now, right? But we still have this pervasive messaging that fat is the problem a lot of the time, right? Now, fat is a problem, don't get me wrong, especially those omega-6 seed oils and all the processed foods. And fat is super high calorically. Fat has 9 calories per gram versus 4 calories per gram in carbs and proteins. And then also alcohol has 7. We're going to talk a little bit more about that in the next episode. However, fat, and easy to eat fat, is going to dramatically increase our calorie consumption. However, it's probably not as damaging to our system, especially when we eat healthier fats, as opposed to sugar. And that was kind of manipulated all the way back in the 70s. So now that we've kind of brought you through a little bit of a timeline here, I also want to talk about one more topic. And this started to happen, I want to say in like the early 1900s. I think I have it here. But was also kind of a concurrent issue as all this was going on, that we thought we were doing the right thing. However, it turned out to potentially not be the right thing and potentially dangerous and harmful. when you look at the big picture. And that was the fortification of foods. Fortification of certain foods with vitamins and minerals that we thought we needed, which we probably did, and maybe it did help minimize some deficiency type diseases like pellagra and rickets and those kind of things. There was a handful of diseases that, if you're not getting the right nutrients, could have been pretty pervasive, and maybe this did help. However, it came with a little bit of a side issue here that we're not really recognizing. I didn't really understand this until not too long ago, and now I still don't think many people understand it at all. Matter of fact, they think they're doing the right thing by eating fortified foods because they're getting better vitamins and minerals. So basically, food enrichment is this synthetic adding of vitamins and minerals in the more of a synthetic form back into the food after a lot of those natural vitamins and minerals have been somewhat stripped out of the food due to the ultra processing protocol. Okay. I know it's getting a little crazy. So basically, when we were fortifying foods, we didn't foresee this problem right here. And I'm going to kind of read some of this because it gets a little nuanced. So basically, by enriching foods with things like B vitamins, like riboflavin and niacin, they stimulate appetite, which leads to higher consumption of refined calorie-dense foods, okay? So enriching foods did kind of a couple things. One, it allowed us to market food a certain way, right? It allowed us to say, oh, this is fortified with more vitamin D or calcium or B vitamins and all these things. And we thought that was a good thing, right? And maybe it was to a certain degree. It was allowing us to still get those nutrients in. But obviously, when you strip those nutrients out and then put them back in, they're not in the same format, okay? They're going to be different. And what happens here is that when we're eating ultra-processed, like edible food-like substances that aren't necessarily whole foods, what happens is that our bodies are not getting the nutrition they need. But when you fortify the food, it kind of creates this false idea that the food is actually nourishing us, when in reality, a lot of times it's not. So it allows our bodies to not start to say, hey, we don't want these foods anymore because they're not nourishing us, and kind of hacks that system and allows us to feel somewhat nourished to a degree where it's like, oh, we're going to keep eating those foods. It allows us to keep eating these junk foods thinking that they were nourishing us when they were super calorically dense. We're going to talk about that in a minute, but not necessarily has the right form of certain nutrients, didn't really have the appropriate nutrient profiles and all the synergistic benefits to the nutrients in a certain format to where it really benefited our health much. It allowed us to kind of supplement these nutrients thinking that we were eating foods that were healthier than they actually were. So it allows us to keep eating these junk foods. So it's kind of an interesting little conundrum here where we think these foods, our physiology almost thinks these foods are good for us when they come with a whole host of issues. The primary issue being overconsumption, right? And it's leading to obesity and metabolic syndrome and heart disease and all these other things. So what started out as kind of a public health tool and initiative and maybe a well-meaning thing has turned into a primary driver of overconsumption. And I might have mentioned it already, but I think overconsumption is the primary issue with food in our modern landscape. And not only that, but it gives the big food companies more ammo to utilize within their marketing tactics and allows them to try to pretend that these foods are so good for us, or that, you should grab this food because it's lower fat and it's higher in vitamin D, or it's fortified with calcium, or you're going to get all your B vitamins, all your daily recommended B vitamins in this certain serving of this certain packaged, processed, horrible food. So you can see how it's been a manipulative little system that really has us in quite a predicament. So let's just recap the current state of the food landscape here. I'm just going to hit a couple bullet points. So the food supply has become increasingly processed with over 10,000 additives now allowed in U.S. foods. 1,000 to 1,500 of these are either banned or restricted in the European Union and in a whole bunch of other countries. But those specific ingredients are still in a ton of U.S. foods. The FDA's generally recognized as safe system allows many of these additives to continuously be put into the food supply without super rigorous review. Now, 4 crops, corn, soy, wheat, and rice, account for 66% of the calories consumed in the American diet. 74% of packaged foods contain added sugars, often under 61 different names. These little added sugars can go into these foods and they can be on the label as potentially 61 different names, which just further confuses everybody. Next bullet point. Americans now consume 85 pounds of vegetable oils and 152 pounds of sugar each year. And ultra-processed foods now account for 58% of the total energy intake in the standard U.S. diet. This is kind of where we're at, all right? And that's led to some metabolic consequences. So now we have caloric overload. So that's going to lead to chronic inflammation, those high, processed sugars and fats and super insulin spiking foods leads to chronic inflammation. This can lead to liver overload with the high fructose corn syrup. Fructose specifically is kind of hard on the liver, especially in this format, which is leading to a huge ramping up of non-alcoholic liver disease, fatty liver disease. And then now we're in this whole situation where we call it metabolic syndrome. And this is kind of the combination of obesity, central obesity, high blood pressure, high blood sugar, and abnormal cholesterol levels. They're calling that metabolic syndrome. I think some people call it syndrome X. So those are the metabolic consequences. How about the economic consequences? All right. Diet and food-related chronic diseases in this country cost the healthcare system $1.4 trillion annually with a T. Not a billion. Trillion, 1,000 billion. All right. That's a huge amount of money when you try to just wrap your head around that. Specifically, 604 billion in direct medical costs, 393 billion in lost productivity because of all the chronic disease, disability and whatnot, and then 425 billion in just other costs from like informal caregiving and all these other things. So now, the situation wouldn't be as bad as it is if our healthcare system was really good at helping people with these things, but it's not designed for that. It's just simply bad at curing. It's pretty good at managing, but it's not good at all at eradicating chronic disease. So let's talk a little bit more about that medical system. And I would call it the broken medical system. So I'm just going to read this. Imagine a machine designed to keep us healthy, but instead it's primarily focused on managing symptoms and maintaining a state of controlled sickness. And it's not even just ineffective. With many of these chronic ailments, it's downright dangerous. Welcome to modern medicine. Let's talk about medical errors. This doesn't get talked about enough, and some people get almost like triggered when you talk about this, especially healthcare professionals, okay? But we have to be able to own this and understand just the state of medical errors, and I wouldn't even call it medical errors, but more just like side effects of medicine leading to problems. 251,000 deaths annually. I'm going to repeat that. Medicine in general, and a lot of times medical errors, maybe mistakes, maybe goof-ups, maybe, medications, not taken properly or potentially even, misprescribed or any of those things, causes up to 251,000, 250,000 deaths annually. Now, this comes from the Agency of Healthcare Research and Quality, AHRQ, and they cite a range from 98,000 deaths annually, but it could be 440,000 deaths annually as well. They cite a range in between there. So 251,000 is kind of just in the middle. All right. So if we just take the 251,000 deaths annually, that equates to a 9/11 tragedy happening every week. Pause for dramatic effect. And, I'm not going to go off on a tangent here, but I'm a chiropractor. And every now and then we see some sort of issue with a chiropractic adjustment causing some sort of major harm to somebody. It's super rare. When you hash out the statistics, it's like 1 in like 10 million adjustments or something where something major can happen to somebody. And still the research has never even proven a causative effect. So let's say, most people have heard of like a chiropractic adjustment happening and then a patient having a stroke. And then people are always trying to tell me that, that they think that they could be paralyzed or something. And I'm not sure if there's any history of that ever happening. I guess I need to do some research and figure that out. But the stroke thing has happened a few times. And most of the time, from what I understand, the patient is usually already having the stroke, because one of the main symptoms of having a stroke is usually intense neck pain or like a headache like you've never had before, like the most intense headache you've ever had, that kind of thing. And those are things that chiropractors help people with all day, every day. Right? So people go to the chiropractor sometimes having a stroke. Now, it's negligence on the chiropractor's part if they don't do the necessary diagnostic procedures or do their due diligence to make sure that patient isn't having a stroke and then adjust them, right? But again, the patient was most of the time having the stroke already. And this doesn't happen often. I'm talking, you might hear about it once every few years or something. And I can probably only remember specifically 5 or 6 cases that I've heard about in my 10-year career. But this is still retroactively going all the way back, hearing about these cases from when chiropractic originated. Okay. But think about this. It gets all the media press. Everybody freaks out. Doctors are all over Twitter going crazy. There was just one a couple of weeks ago. And it was like this major ordeal, right? Everybody's saying, chiropractors, why would you ever get your neck adjusted? Why would you ever do this, ever do that? And I just started going on this one Twitter thread, or X thread, I guess. And I just started putting all the numbers that I just cited to you. I said, medicine kills 250,000 people a year. Now, I'm not saying anything is justified, and it's tragic what happened in that chiropractic setting. If the chiropractor was even a causative factor at all, it's tragic and it should never happen. And that's why competent physicians, chiropractors specifically, do their due diligence to make sure that's not happening. And if they even feel an inkling, if that could even possibly be the scenario, that chiropractor is referring that patient out quickly, effectively, and is usually not adjusting that patient specifically with a rotary adjustment that could potentially cause some sort of disruption of the vertebral artery. There's just an easy due diligence that can happen in that setting that minimizes and almost eradicates that even chance. Okay. But every now and then it happens, maybe not even every now and then, super rarely, super rarely. I think I saw it's like 400 times more of a chance being struck by lightning than you do having a stroke from a chiropractic adjustment. However, the media goes crazy with these things. But I don't understand why it's not headline news every night how medicine kills 250,000 people a year. Just sit here and try to rationalize that with me. Try to understand that with me. How the heck does something, or even let's take like a supplement does some sort of damage to somebody. Somehow somebody has a problem with a natural supplement, which is super rare as well. It gets all the media attention. We demonize these things, right? But we just sit here and ignore that 251,000 people are dying from standard medical procedures every year. So when somebody comes at me and freaks out about something like that, sometimes I just kind of put things in perspective for them. And I don't try to downplay it or dodge it or anything, but it's just absolutely bonkers to me that these can be the real statistics. 251,000 people, that's the third leading cause of death in the country. It's like heart disease, cancer, medical errors. The third leading cause of death in the country. But it's never talked about. As a matter of fact, it's like you're not supposed to talk about it. I'm going to talk about it. Okay. It's crazy. So anyways, there's issues with our medical system. Not only is it ineffective for a lot of these chronic diseases, now don't get me wrong, emergency medicine is unbelievably fantastic in this country. Our medical system is designed to save your life. If you're in a car accident, if you're having a stroke, if something crazy happens and you need emergency medical care, we are top notch. And don't let me make you feel as if I'm bashing modern medicine much at all. Okay. I do think there's some problems with it and it needs to be addressed like from the ground up. However, there are so many huge, amazing, technological, innovative things that have come about in modern medicine that is absolutely remarkable. Okay. However, when it comes to managing chronic disease, it's really good at managing it. It's not really good at eradicating it. It's super profitable to manage chronic disease. And I'm not saying that that's the entire motivation here, but it seems to me like the medical system to this point doesn't even try to reverse or cure chronic disease. It just tries to manage it. And I think most of you listening to this probably going to agree with me. So what leads to some of these systemic issues in the medical system? Not only the errors, but there's also this entire regulatory process and this style of medicine that just keeps it in this somewhat ineffective state as far as dealing with chronic disease. And I've come up with a few of them here after I've done some research. So some systemic issues in healthcare delivery, misaligned incentives. So insurance companies, profit from growing healthcare expenditures for sure. It's like having a firefighter that kind of gets paid more when your house burns down. Basically, there's little to no motivation to embrace more cost-effective treatments, more disease reversing treatments, more root cause medicine. And then you've got the industry influence. Okay. And when I say industry influence, most people are going to understand this is pharmaceutical industry influence, big pharma, right? So the pharmaceutical industry is this giant conglomerate. Most people understand just the massive, massive stature to this industry, and they have so much influence. And here's where some of the influence starts. 2/3 of medical research is sponsored by pharmaceutical companies. 2/3. The very companies that profit from selling drugs are the ones telling us which ones work 2/3 of the time. Now we've got this whole problem of insane advertising. In 2019, prescription drug spending in the US reached $369.7 billion, or about $1,128 per person. And that didn't include over-the-counter pharmaceuticals. That was prescription pharmaceuticals. In 2020, the pharmaceutical industry spent $6.58 billion on direct-to-consumer advertising. We're going to talk about that in a second too. Direct-to-consumer advertising, because there's a significance there. But let's just get these numbers in perspective here. $6.58 billion direct-to-consumer, $18.5 billion on marketing to healthcare professionals. Why would they market to healthcare professionals? Because the healthcare professionals influence the prescribing, right? This means a lot of money being spent to convince these doctors or nurses or, plenty of other healthcare professionals in the space that these are the right products, these are the right drugs, this is the right way to do things. 18.5 billion, that's 3 times as much as they did direct to consumer. That's billion with a B. They also spent 233 million in 2020 on lobbying and Capitol Hill and getting in these politicians and these bills and all these different things. They spent 233 million lobbying in 2020. That's when this stat was recorded here. And that was more than any other industry. Now back to the direct to consumer marketing. There's only 2 countries on the planet that allow direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertising. Can you guess which ones they are? The U.S. is one because you see the commercials on TV all the time. The U.S. and New Zealand. Those are the only 2 countries that allow direct-to-consumer pharmaceutical advertising. They're the only ones that allow commercials on TV for you to see a certain drug. Now, right now, all the rage is, I can't sit down and watch a football game without seeing like 10 Wegovy or Ozempic ads. I guess they know their market a little bit, but they're everywhere. It's like every time I look up at the screen on a commercial, it's like, oh, Wegovy. And then of course, it's this super manipulative, like happy-go-lucky. The entire ad, the entire commercial has nothing to do with the actual issue. It just shows like people just in love and having so much fun because they're on these drugs. Like, give me a break. They know how to play with your emotions. And of course, because they have the biggest budget in the world, they're going to also have the best marketing in the world. Right? They're going to know how to like manipulate you into thinking that these are the things that you need to, supply you with the quality of life that you're looking for. And then you go into the doctor's office and you ask for a certain drug. That happens nowhere else in the world besides here and New Zealand. You should not go into the doctor and suggest the drug that you think you need without the doctor having a full workup and having to, basically understand exactly what he thinks you need. And then from a doctor's perspective that shouldn't be influenced by all these pharmaceutical interests and money and whatnot, should then give you a rational solution, which is usually going to be a drug or a surgery or a specialist or something. But that's just the model of the standard medical system now. But really it should be, lifestyle first and then a handful of other things. And then, then we try pharmaceuticals. However, you shouldn't be going in there saying, hey, I need this drug. And the only reason that happens is because of the direct-to-consumer marketing. And most people are shocked when they hear that only 2 countries in the world allow that. And the U.S. is the main one, obviously because New Zealand is much smaller than us and doesn't have near the impact and influence and GDP and all that. Okay, moving on. We also have broken payment models. Okay, this goes back into the insurance situation I just mentioned here. So reimbursement-based medicine rather than evidence-based medicine. Okay, a lot of times what's happening in these medical settings is what's going to make that hospital system, that doctor, whatever, the most money, not necessarily what's best for the patient. And that's pretty obvious that that's happening. People don't want to talk about it. People don't want to, believe that that's what's happening, but it 100% is. Can't get around that. So it's like paying a mechanic based on, how many parts they can replace, not whether they actually fix your car. And then we got this whole category of malaligned incentives and problems with the medical system, of overtreatment and unnecessary care. Now, a lot of times chiropractors get in some heat for this, because they continue to adjust patients when potentially that patient, is kind of at a point of maximum medical improvement. They're not going to get any better, when obviously there's tons of other benefits as well, even if it's just mobility and those kind of things that a lot of patients want to keep coming because they notice they feel so much better when they're consistently adjusted. And that's usually the patient's choice, not the doctor's influence saying you have to be here all the time. I have more patients that I try to kick out of my office that I can't. They're like, I feel better when I'm consistently under your care, and it's clear night and day how much better I feel. So I'm going to keep coming. It's not me saying I need you here because I need your money. It's definitely not that. Okay. But what happens in the standard medical system, a chiropractor is such a small little CAM profession, complementary and alternative medicine, tiny little profession compared to big medicine, right? And what happens in big medicine is that 30% of all medical care in the US is unnecessary. 30%. And not only unnecessary, it's potentially harmful. And at the very least, it's wasteful, right? 30%, it's a third. Overtreatment costs an estimated $210 billion annually. I just put a little quote here. We're talking about $210 billion annually spent on treatments that at best do nothing and at worst actually harm patients. And that might go back into the 251,000 deaths, third leading cause of death in the country. Next topic here is healthcare professional burnout and then the medical errors. So we talked about the medical errors already, but 42% of physicians reported feeling burnt out in 2020. And I want to say this was 2020 prior to all the COVID craziness, but I guess there wasn't much 2020 prior to COVID craziness. But so 42% of physicians reported feeling burnt out in 2020. And maybe COVID had something to do with that, I imagine, but this was just reported that in 2020, 42% of physicians were feeling burned out. But I remember Chris Kresser in his book, Unconventional Medicine, reports a similar figure prior to 2020. I want to say his book was written in like 2017 or 2018 or something. And I remember the number was right around there. I want to say it was maybe in the 30s. But of course, then we have this craziness of this pandemic. And I imagine a ton more physicians were feeling pretty burnt out from the whole thing too. And then we have this whole problem of, since we're talking about nutrition tonight and we're talking about, nutrition related chronic diseases and the medical system that tries to help us with those things, one of the main problems is that doctors don't get the nutrition training. They don't get nutritional education like they should. Medical students receive only 19 hours on average of nutrition education throughout their entire tenure as a medical student. And I think I mentioned earlier that chiropractors don't get much more than that. So I'm not trying to say that I'm holier than, your standard medical physician, even though I've done a ton of I am way more advanced when it comes to nutrition than your standard medical doctor. Some medical doctors have done a lot of post-grad or postdoc training just like I have. But the fact that I've done that allows me to say, I can confidently say I know a lot more about nutrition from experience, from my postdoc training, from my official education, and then even my undergraduate education than your average medical doctor. But I'm not trying to toot any horns or anything. But the 19 hours figure comes from a 2010 study, and a further 2015 study found that 71% of medical students provide less than the recommended 25 hours of nutrition education. So I said the average is 19. The recommendation, I guess some sort of medical board, is that medical students are supposed to get at least 25 hours, and only 27% of the U.S. medical schools actually meet that requirement of 25 hours. And I'm throwing a bunch of numbers out here, but 27%. So like a quarter of U.S. medical schools actually get the recommended 25 hours. And the 25 hours is still abysmal. That's tiny. That's less time than your average person spends watching TV every week. And then another portion of that study that parsed out that only 14% of physicians feel adequately trained to provide nutrition counseling. Only 14%. But of course, every supplement bottle, every health change or recommendation or anything always says you got to consult your doctor first, right? Please consult your healthcare physician because we don't want to be sued. Because they have to do that because we have to prop the physicians up as some super holy position that knows everything, right? But at the same time, all these statistics that we just talked about right there go to show that they don't know enough to make you, They don't know enough to give you those recommendations or even give you the stamp of approval that says, hey, this is good. Go ahead and do this. So also keep that in mind when they try to say, oh, this vitamin or this mineral or all this stuff is hocus pocus and baloney and da da da. Most of the time they haven't been trained on it at all. And I think because they haven't been trained on it, they must believe it's important. All right, listen up, gym rats. Are you tired of supplements that overpromise and underdeliver? Yeah, I know. Many supplements don't even contain what they say they do these days. Fear not. Introducing Legion Athletics. Their no-nonsense approach to supplementation is based on real science and real results. Whether you're looking for a new protein powder, a better pre-workout without a bunch of junk in it, or you just got to re-up on your fish oil, your creatine, your joint support formula, Legion is my go-to supplement line due to their evidence-based approach and reliably effective products without a bunch of BS ingredients. Visit legionathletics.com and enter code DRE, Dr. E with no period, at the checkout for 20% off your first order and double loyalty points on subsequent orders. Legion supplements, because you ain't got time for supplements that don't work. All right. So I know that was kind of doom and gloom and a little dark, but what do we do about it? So quickly, I came up with a few ideas here about kind of a path to reform, some things that should happen in the healthcare industry to make it a little bit more of a health-centered situation. And this could be kind of almost a health-centered revolution if we could do some of these things. But, there's things that we could do like realigning the healthcare incentives. We need to focus more on patient outcomes and preventative care. An ounce prevention is worth a pound of cure. Pretty sure Benjamin Franklin said that. But we're not even really focused on cures. We're focused on management, not even cures. So we need to really kind of imagine a system where your doctor gets paid more for the better outcomes he gets, or prescriptions are much more valuable when they actually fix the problem, don't manage the problem. So, I mean, there's a number of different things that could happen. And actually, I remember hearing, I think I read in a book somewhere that there are some countries that do kind of operate like this. I want to say maybe like Japan or some sort of Asian countries that if your doctor is not getting good outcomes, they get like completely, they get handled somehow. I mean, I don't know if their licenses get stripped or what, but they're judged not on, how many prescriptions they can pump out, but by the outcomes that they get. And we think that that's what it is. But at the end of the day, especially when it comes to chronic disease, it's not really outcomes based. It's more symptom management. So next situation here, we need to emphasize lifestyle medicine. This is a big, obvious one. I think a lot of physicians understand this. I think a lot of patients understand this, but still the system just does not encourage it as much as it does pharmaceuticals, surgeries, certain specialist recommendations, those kind of things. It's not emphasized. And, things like nutrition, physical activity, stress management, they're not just buzzwords. These are actually foundational pillars of health, and they need to be addressed at the foundational level before we move up the rungs of the ladder to pharmaceuticals and surgeries and those kind of things. And I actually think certain exercise and lifestyle and sleep and those kind of things should be prereqs before we can write prescriptions. I think that would be a huge improvement. But those things are less controllable. They're less enforceable. So it's hard to kind of, I guess, guarantee that the outcomes would be there. But that's what needs to happen, is to put that accountability back on the patient a little bit to handle some things here first. But it starts with the doctor understanding those things and then therefore recommending those things just as sternly as they would recommend a certain medication and write a certain script. You could write a script for, hey, I need you to walk 30 minutes 3 times a day. I need you to walk 30 minutes 3 times a week. I need you to do these stretches. I need you to do this. I need you, right? Like, I need you to get 8 hours of sleep for 7 days straight before I can write you this prescription. Like those kind of things. I understand. It sounds maybe lofty and like that would never happen. And it's sad that it actually even sounds like that. So we need to shift the empowerment back to the individuals. And I think encouraging more proactive health management across the board would be huge. Okay. We need to really have this like nationwide goal of everybody takes their own health into their own hands, and that would just create this huge boom in just kind of the attitude towards health and disease and just really wakes people up, snaps people out of their slumber as far as like what they're doing to their health day in and day out. But also we need to reform like research and we need to really eradicate the conflicts of interest There's too many corporate conflicts of interest when it comes to research. And we need to set up a better model to where these universities and where these studies can be done is not so dependent upon big industry corporate money, pharmaceutical money, big food money, big whatever money. Okay. These research institutes get a lot of their funding from those corporations, which, I mean, just by the very nature of it, is going to be hard to shine a light negatively on something that corporation is actively doing and maybe highly profitable with. It's just common sense. So we need to not be taking so much money. Think about all this money that the government's throwing around, like billions to overseas interests and whatnot, wars, Ukraine, Israel, all these things, right? Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to get political here, but think about the kind of money that they're just tossing over there for what they think is justifiably a good reason. Politics, sorts that out. And some people feel one way, some people don't. Some people feel the exact opposite way. But think about tossing that kind of money more into the research on health of our citizens, of our culture, of our productivity as a nation because of our health. I mean, this is just like common sense to me. I want to get into a lot of like actual like protocols we could do. I'm just kind of brainstorming here as we talk. So let's kind of get away from the medical system for a minute. We'll come back to it in a second. And let's just talk about some quick little personal strategies for kind of navigating this food landscape that we were talking about. And I think one of the main things you can do, and this is kind of common sense, is to just start focusing on more whole foods, minimize the ultra processed foods. The big ones being sugary foods, added sugar specifically, high fructose corn syrup, flour, breads, pastries, those kind of things that are super processed, ultra processed carbohydrates, and then also the vegetable seed oils. Okay, those corn, canola, safflower, sunflower, grapeseed. I'm probably missing a handful. Corn oil. I think I said corn. But try to minimize the consumption of those things. Now, conveniently, maybe inconveniently, they're all in the same foods. They're all in the junk foods. They're all in the ultra processed foods, right? So it's not only that you need to avoid one of them like super vigilantly. When you avoid the junk food, you avoid them all pretty much together, right? Sounds super basic, but when you move from theory to practice, it's not easy, considering these ultra processed foods we're just inundated with them. They're coming at us from all angles. They're everywhere we go. Every time we go into a gas station, we have to just walk through this sea of ultra processed food, okay? And drinks and beverages and all those other things. So try to look at those foods as the enemy. When you see it that way, you start to almost tint your vision that way. You'll start making better choices. But you got to start to understand how to read some labels and stuff, and we'll talk about that later. Okay, just some lifestyle modifications. We have to be less sedentary. 40% of the U.S. population is completely sedentary. They don't exercise. They don't meet basic human movement requirements. 40%. It's almost half. Unbelievable. That's probably the most accessible, huge solution is if people would just regularly exercise somewhat vigorously. I'm talking maybe 30 to 45 minutes, 3 times a week, 20 to 30 minutes of resistance training plus 20 to 30 minutes of cardiovascular activity. And it would be huge. But 40% of people aren't even moving enough throughout the day, let alone not even exercising. The average American sits 10 to 13 hours a day. I think 13 is actually the number, but 10, I always say 10 to 13 because there's some studies I've seen that show less. But 10 to 13 hours a day. Then you sleep for 7 to 8 hours. You're only moving for a few hours out of the day. And then I kind of mentioned it in the last one there, but resistance training, I think, is one of the biggest buffers to this whole situation. When we resistance train, there's so many things that happen. It's not just about building big, bulky muscles, right? It's not just trying to look, like John Cena. Okay. This is fundamentally a huge health promoting habit / behavior. It's the single best way that we can increase insulin sensitivity. We talked a lot about insulin earlier. We're going to talk more about it on the next episode. But a single bout of resistance training, I think it was like 30 minutes of resistance training, can increase insulin sensitivity for up to 24 hours. Like I said, when we eat all these processed carbs, our insulin receptors get beat up. They get kind of tired of dealing with it. They start to resist the insulin. They're like, hey, you're not doing it for me anymore. I'm going to go ahead and not allow you to allow the sugar into the cell. But a single bout of resistance training increased that sensitivity for 24 hours. Just one bout. All right. So this is a no-brainer that resistance training is way more about health than it is about muscles. Now, it is about muscles, but your muscles are about health. Okay. It's this, you can't separate them. And not only that, but resistance training is going to radically increase your metabolic rate. Not radically, but it's going to increase your metabolic rate and your energy expenditure, which is going to help buffer this inundation of calories that's always coming in. Okay. Quickly, I was going to tell a little story. There is this guy in my gym, and I go to the gym 4 or 5 times a week, and I'm doing mostly resistance training. And there's a guy in there, and I see him all the time, and I'm really trying to work up the courage to ask him if he's got like blood sugar issues, because this guy's probably 6'3". He's got to be 350 pounds. Okay. He's like 6'3", but I feel like he's as wide as he is tall. He's huge. Okay. And super nice guy. I've talked to him a couple times. Super strong guy. He looks like he was a former like strongman or something. And, I'll see him deadlifting 500 pounds for reps, for like 10, 15 reps. And it just doesn't even look like it's like straining him. He's just like putting the thing down and lifting it back up. Like there's no strain. He's a beast. Okay. But he's huge. He's got a big old belly in front of him. And I'm just like, I'm thinking, if all these theories are true, and I know they are, the way he works his system, even though he's tremendously overweight, I mean, he's got a BMI well over 40 for sure. But if all these systems are working, I bet his insulin sensitivity is pretty good, even though he is the exact candidate that you would see. And if you didn't understand kind of how he works out and whatnot, you can see some muscle mass on his body for sure, but there's a ton of fat as well. But one of these days, I almost want to ask him, I'm like, hey man, have you had blood sugar issues in the past? Or are you currently a type 2 diabetic or not? And I almost would guarantee, if I didn't see his exercise habits, that I would say that person probably is. Now, of course, this is medical information. It's none of my business. And that's probably why I haven't decided to ask him. But at the same time, I really am curious, because I bet he's not. The way he trains and the way he works out, even though he's tremendously overweight, I bet the physiological process that's happening within him is preventing his insulin resistance from accruing. And because he works out so hard the way he does, I bet he's somewhat metabolically healthy, even though he is tremendously overweight. But he's doing a lot of things right to minimize the effects of that predicament that he's in. Just curious. Maybe one of these days I'll ask him, and then we'll talk about it on the podcast. Obviously, I won't say his name or anything like that, because that would be medical information, and I probably won't even ask him. I'll have to ask him in a weird way to minimize the actual intrusion of privacy that would be. Hence why I haven't done it to this point. But anyways, when you resistance train, you're putting those excess, ultra processed, not so great calories to work. And I think that this is like the best hack for the system that we're in and the situation that we're in collectively. When you can buffer a lot of the, I guess, abuse that's happening to your physiology when you're having to consume a lot of these things that are in there. Now, you're never having to consume them. However, trust me, it's hard to eat really well this day and age, specifically. It is. I mean, there's processed food coming at you all over the place. You want to go out to eat with friends, and you want to go to a restaurant, you want to enjoy something with your spouse. Like you're getting inundated with a ton of these ultra processed foods. So, if we're not going to live this crazy health nut life, which, I think we all should, but, if you don't want to have to be almost radical about it to stay healthy, resistance training is just the biggest buffer. It's the biggest hack that you can be doing consistently, regularly, somewhat intensely. And I think you can buffer a lot of this. Now, I don't know if that's the best strategy. I think you should try to address everything from the root and minimize any of that food. But if you're going to enjoy some of those foods, if you're intensely resistance training, I think that you're going to buffer a lot of the negative effects that those foods and this food landscape that we live in can do to us. So just keep that in mind. It's just something I constantly am thinking about. But obviously maintaining a healthy weight, like a decent BMI, is critical for minimizing, what the effects of all these things we've been talking about, and things like smoking, drinking, those kind of things. Just obviously not great choices when you have so many other things trying to kind of attack your health. It doesn't help to almost proactively attack it yourself. So, okay, I'm calling this like the macro level action taking. Okay, I've created 10, maybe 15 things that we can do um, as kind of a collective, as a nation, as like an administration coming into the White House or something could do that would really, really improve our circumstances. So this is how I've mapped this out. I'm just going to read this because I can't remember all this. So I've got a topic, and then I've got a why, a how, and the impact it would have. Okay. So here we go. The first one: implement national resistance training programs in schools. Why? Muscle health is crucial for preventing chronic diseases and improving metabolic health. How? Just integrate mandatory resistance training into the K through 12 physical education curriculum. Impact it would have: it builds lifelong exercise habits, improves physical and mental health, and reduces long-term chronic disease risk. Number 2, ban junk food marketing to children and pharma ads to adults. Why? Food marketing heavily influences children's dietary choices, while pharma ads distort healthcare priorities. How? The FTC could regulate junk food ads targeting kids. The FDA could ban direct to consumer pharmaceutical advertising. Like I said, the US and New Zealand are the only two countries that allow this to begin with. It'd be easy to get rid of this. And the impact that would have would be it would reduce unhealthy food consumption among children, and it would limit pharmaceutical industry influence in healthcare, but also people seeking out certain pharmaceuticals because they are constantly being marketed to for them. Number 3, revolutionize the SNAP program, or the food stamp program, and school lunch programs. Why? Government food programs often subsidize unhealthy choices, contributing to obesity and diabetes. How? We could just ban sugary drinks from SNAP. We could overhaul school lunches to provide protein and nutrient-dense foods. The impact this would have is obvious. It would improve the nutritional status, especially for low-income families, school children, and whatnot. And this would reduce obesity and diabetes and take a huge burden off the healthcare system, which in time is going to allow people to recoup any kind of investment that this would require. It's just obvious. So number 4, implement clear food labeling and a health tax on ultra processed foods. Why? Hidden sugars and unhealthy ingredients contribute to poor dietary choices. Clear. How? Mandate clear labeling of added sugars. Introduce, we talked about added sugars. Like I said, there's 61 different potential names for added sugars or sugar in general. 61. Why? That shouldn't be allowed. That just allows for deception and hidden sugars and all kinds of stuff to be just like added and hidden, and you don't know about it. That's completely insane to me. The impact would be that it would empower consumers to make more informed choices, and it discourages the consumption of unhealthy foods. I mean, clear as day. Number 5, create national guidelines for optimized protein intake and muscle health. Why? Proper protein intake is crucial for muscle maintenance and overall health, especially for aging populations. How? Revise the USDA dietary guidelines to emphasize protein intake and muscle health. The impact this would have, it would improve muscle preservation, reduce sarcopenia, which is the loss of muscle, and lowers chronic disease across the board. Okay. That's just why I'm so passionate about muscle and resistance training and health. Is not because it's a physique goal aesthetic thing. It's just like, this is the key to maintaining health in our current landscape. Number 6, we could incentivize local farming and eliminate harmful agricultural subsidies. So why? Food deserts contribute to poor nutrition. Current subsidies favor unhealthy crops. Like we need to favor the better stuff. We need to not subsidize the garbage. How? We could just provide grants for urban farming, redirect subsidies from corn and soy to more like fruits and vegetables and maybe proteins of some sort. The impact this would have, it would increase access to fresh, healthy foods. It aligns agricultural production with nutritional needs. I mean, no brainer. Next one, reform the NIH research priorities and eliminate conflicts of interest. Why? Current research often prioritizes disease management over prevention due to the industry influence. How? We could ban conflicts of interest among NIH researchers. We could shift the focus to disease prevention. The impact this would have, it would promote unbiased research, unbiased science on disease prevention, and potentially would transform our healthcare approach completely. Number 8, we could implement nationwide exercise as medicine programs. Why? Physical activity is a powerful tool for preventing and managing chronic disease. The most powerful tool we probably have at this moment. How? Allow doctors to prescribe exercise, provide tax and insurance breaks for gym memberships and fitness programs, and just prioritize that is the first line of defense within doctors' offices, but also just collectively as a nation. We think we think fitness first, you know, that would be huge. Number 9, launch a comprehensive public health campaign on metabolic health. Why? Many Americans are unaware of the crucial role of metabolic health in preventing chronic disease, like kind of cascade that a lot of our older population tends to just fall into. And eventually that's what usually leads to their demise, is just this cascade of chronic disease over time that just eventually leads to them passing away. HHS, the Health and Human Services branch of the government, could launch a nationwide campaign emphasizing the importance of diet, exercise, muscle health, stress management, just the basic fundamentals. I call them the elements of health: nutrition, movement and exercise, psychology and psychiatric kind of, wellness, and then rejuvenation, recuperation, sleep, unplugging, those kind of things. These are all just the foundations of health, and we need to prioritize those things. We need to be talking about more about these things than we do some of the other garbage that we're constantly arguing about. Number 10, we need to establish mandatory health education curriculum in schools. This has been something I've been talking about forever. Why? Early education on health and nutrition is crucial for lifelong healthy habits. When you learn this stuff early and you start to create some habits earlier, you take those into adulthood, you take them into so many areas of your life that would just benefit. All right. How? You could just implement comprehensive health education covering nutrition, exercise, metabolic health. Those 3 things would be huge. Diet, exercise, and just the importance of metabolic health as far as your quality of life. And that needs to be emphasized as more important than, your fancy career, or, having this, this brilliant education to get a job or whatnot. What if on a resume or just your initial employment interview, you were asked more about your health? Think about how much productivity is lost because of like disease or disability or chronic disease. Like, this should be a focus. We should be focused on hiring healthy employees, not necessarily just if they have the qualification for the job. Like, of course, that's important and that needs to be recognized. But like, is this person healthy? Is this person going to be able to like show up to work and not be sick all the time, and not have to run off to doctor's appointments all the time, and not have to miss work because they're disabled because of their chronic condition, because of their lifestyle? Why aren't we thinking about these things? So that was some stuff we can do collectively. Now, how about what can we do individually? All right, I'm going to run through these fast, but these are some kind of micro level actions that you can take specifically in your own home, in your own life. Just some things to prioritize that would really help buffer and minimize the damage that this entire situation that we're in does to you, your family, your loved ones. And here's how you do it. Okay. So first thing I would do is conduct a food audit. So I would download an app like MyFitnessPal or another one of those apps. Nowadays, it's so easy to find these. And I would just try to spend a couple of weeks tracking and recording everything. Tracking and recording everything. A lot of these apps have like scanners that you can just scan your phone. You can scan the food if it's a packaged food, or if it's not a packaged food, which I would be super happy if it wasn't a packaged food. You can just search it, like an apple or a banana or, an avocado or something. You can search those and you can find the average apple, average avocado, and you'll get the nutrients and just track it. You will be shocked at how much you learn if you stick to this diligently for even a week. You'll be blown away where these calories are coming from, what's in what, how much portions, what, even like certain restaurant meals. This doesn't mean you can't go out to a restaurant. Most of these restaurant meals are on these apps now too. So you go out to Olive Garden and you have a big Italian dish and you look at the calories and the breakdown and the fats, and you'll be like, whoa, you will learn so much just by doing that. So I call that a food audit. I think that's a great idea. I have all my clients do that for the first week or two, sometimes 2 to 4 weeks before I even really start working with them. And sometimes I don't even end up working with them because they did that. And they're like, hey, I understand where my pitfalls and problems are. Because of doing this, this is insane what I'm doing. And I already know where I need to start. I'm like, fantastic. Get after it. If you need more help later, hit me up. And that leads to the number 2 point here. Master the art of label reading. Just learn the basics of what food labels are and where the abundance of the nutrients are and what means what, and just start looking at them. Start understanding that when you look at a label and you see all these processed seed oils, you see sugar, you see high fructose corn syrup, you see a ton of carbohydrates, you see hardly any protein. You're like, oh, maybe I'm going to put this one back. I think that would be a really, really good habit for you individually, specifically to do if you're not already. Number 3, implement the protein first rule. Try to design all your meals around a pretty healthy amount of protein. If you prioritize protein, and we're going to talk about this in the next podcast, you're going to find that you're more satiated. You're going to find that your health benefits a number of different ways. You're going to find that you can't overconsume protein as much. But if you just try to make your plate primarily protein with like side dishes of carbohydrates, vegetables, fruits, those kind of things, you're going to be in a really good spot as far as not falling into this overconsumption mess. Number 4, adopt a minimal to no liquid calories policy. Just get rid of the liquid calories, right? The sodas, the sugary juices, all kinds of beverages that just have tons of sugar, teas and stuff like that. If you happen to opt for the diet version, do it. I think that that's way better. The chemicals that you might be dealing with from the diet version, which is still, there's still a lot of research that needs to be done on those. I think those are way better than the bombardment of sugar onto your system. Your average soda probably has like 34 to 48 grams of sugar, and it's usually high fructose corn syrup. I'd rather you get a hefty dose of aspartame or sucralose or accessulfame or all these other sweeteners that we'll talk about later than the sugar. Okay. Now, I don't think those are great either. I think you should minimize those as well. Opt for the more natural ones like erythritol or stevia, or even like honey. But the huge amounts of highly processed high fructose corn syrup sugars, I think, in my opinion, is dramatically more damaging to your overall health than some of these chemical sweeteners. Okay. More to be talked about at a later date on that. But just get rid of the liquid calories. And part of doing that food audit will show you, holy cow, I got 150 grams of carbs today just from liquids, right? And that's just bonkers. Like even Gatorade, your average Gatorade has like 36 grams of sugar in like a 24 ounce or whatever it is. Maybe it's a 16 ounce. I don't know. Either way, even Gatorade has a tremendous amount of sugar and it's marketed to you as like some healthy hydration drink. But Gatorade Zeros and those kind of things, or Powerade Zeros, they are going to have the artificial sweeteners in there because they don't have the sugar. However, I would still opt for those versus the full sugar version. But there's ways to leverage that. And I sometimes leverage some of those full sugar Gatorades in and around my workouts and stuff. And I can almost leverage some of my knowledge as to what's happening from a hormonal perspective and insulin and understanding all these things to almost get me further to my muscle building or workout goals than just mindlessly consuming them, So we'll talk more about that later too. Okay. Number 5, practice the half plate fruit vegetable rule. Okay. So like I said, if you could just go like half plate protein, half plate fruits and vegetables, you are wildly ahead of like everybody. Okay. I know this is hard to do, but this is just a no-brainer that, and most people understand that healthy lean proteins like chicken, fish, salmon, those kind of things, even grass-fed beefs and those kind of meats, turkey, poultry, those kind of things are way more satiating. And then the fruits and vegetables also have a tremendous amount of micronutrients and fiber and those kind of things that's going to keep you very satiated and full, which again is going to attack this overconsumption issue. All right. Number 6, experiment with intermittent fasting. I specifically hardly ever eat breakfast. This lie that was sold to us about breakfast being the most important meal of the day is just that. It's a myth. It's a lie. Every body is different too. Sometimes depending on your goals, you may want to have food in the morning, you want to eat whenever, but restricting your food into like a 12 to 10 to 8 hour window is actually, there's a lot of benefits to that. I actually had a patient come in just the other day that said he's changed nothing about his diet. I didn't even recommend this to him, which I don't recommend intermittent fasting that often. It's just a helpful tool to like kind of compress your calorie window where you're only eating a certain amount, which leads to less calorie consumption and leads to a handful of other things. However, there's some other benefits as well. But he told me he lost like 30 pounds over the last 6 months just from compressing his eating window, which I'm sure is actually making him not eat as much calorically. But at the same time, he's like, that's all I did. I haven't really changed what I eat. I haven't really changed, much about, what I'm eating or how I eat or even like what I'm drinking. Like he still drinks and stuff. He's like, I lost 30 pounds just from doing that, compressing his eating window. So they call that time restricted eating. Intermittent fasting is the most popular one. Most people try to eat like in the 8-hour window and then leave a 16-hour window for no food. So that would be like going from like, I don't know, 6 o'clock at night down to, oh man, I have to do clock math. What would that be? I don't even know. Never mind. You do the math. Okay. So, I sometimes don't eat till like 1, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, most days. Now, of course, supplement with like some electrolytes or something, some non-calorie beverages or something in the morning, some sea salt and water, black coffee's even okay, those kind of things. MCT oil, it's got calories, so technically you're not fasting, but it minimizes the blood sugar regulation and influence, I guess. So there's lots of different ways to do that, and we'll talk more about that eventually. Number 7, absolutely incorporate some sort of resistance training. All right, if you can get to a gym, awesome. If you can't, like squats, lunges, push-ups, pull-ups, those things are all resistance training. Body weight counts, okay? But 3 to 4 times a week for 30 to 40 minutes of somewhat like challenging resistance training where you're feeling a burn in your muscles. Critical, okay? Feeling that burn in the muscles tells me you're increasing your insulin sensitivity. You're making those muscles work. You're making those muscles pull in glucose. Even if your insulin receptors are like, no, we don't want to. Your muscles are like, we need it. Okay, we need to recover, that kind of a thing. Resistance training is just like the ultimate hack. Number 8, prioritize your sleep hygiene. Got to be getting good sleep too. Sleep is a huge factor as far as a lot of these chronic diseases. Try to create some sort of sleep ritual. Okay. I have a few supplements that I like to take for sleep, and I'm just going to touch on them because we're going to go into a little bit of supplements and stuff later in the next episode. But glycine, inositol, magnesium, L-theanine, ZMA is zinc magnesium aspartate, melatonin. These are all things that can be really helpful in promoting deep restful sleep. Aim for 7 to 9 hours to help support metabolic health. Like I said, having a pre-bed ritual where, hey, I'm drinking this little sleepy time tea. I minimize my phone usage. I get in a super cold room. I start to put the air conditioning down to, whatever degree is super comfortable for you to sleep at. Those are all triggers for you to let your body know, hey, it's sleepy time. Okay, so we're going to get to bed and we're going to get good, healthful rest. Number 9. Okay, this one I just wrote, understand that nobody's coming to save you. All right. Your doctor probably knows little to nothing about nutrition and fitness, which is sad. You have to learn these things. This is a basic human requirement in modern life in 2024. Okay. And I know people are like, but I got to prioritize my kids. You need to prioritize your health even more if you have kids. Your kids are watching you every day. Your kids are seeing your habits. They're picking up your habits and then they're implementing them. And then that's affecting their health. I don't have kids, so I understand it's hard for me to speak on this. It's like me, talking about a women's rights thing when I'm a man. Like it's hard for me to even express any kind of perspective. But as a physician, I can tell you that your kids want you to be healthy, and your kids want you to be shown it. They might not realize it at the time, but they want to observe healthy habits and behaviors that they carry on into their life. Think about just the service that is for them. I don't know if there's a more important thing than teaching your kid how to be healthy. You could teach them all the financial skills in the world. You could teach them all the basic skills that they're going to need to keep them, financially secure or self-dependent and not get, used and abused by a lot of these hucksters out there in these different service-based industries and whatnot. But teaching them how to be healthy, is there anything that's more important than that? That almost guarantees that you have enhanced their quality of life for the rest of their life to whatever controllable degree by teaching them healthy habits and behaviors. And sometimes they can't be taught verbally. They just have to observe it. So you have to be the example. You have to be the change. All right. And then number 10 here is some sort of stress reduction technique. All right. You got to find a way to unplug and de-stress a little bit. We live in just this hyper stressed world. I did the first couple of podcasts, talked a ton about the physical, chemical, and emotional stresses that we encounter day in and day out. Now you're seeing this whole podcast was about one of the major ones, the ultra processed foods, the industry, the pharmaceuticals, all the influence. That's a big time chemical stressor, right? Those are chemical stressors that lead to physical stressors because our physical body isn't as robust and, resilient when we're not in a good physiological situation. But we have to be able to unplug, de-stress, and create some sort of stress management process. And I talked a lot about it in the first couple of podcasts as to how to build your resilience to stress. So when I say implement stress reduction techniques, those are the things like getting good sleep, getting good rest, prayer, meditation, all those kind of things. However, also build up your health reserves, build up your resilience. We talked a ton about how to do that in the first 4 podcasts. So basically, it comes down to eating better, moving better, thinking better, and recouping better. Okay. So all those things will do you a huge service in this whole crazy food landscape we live in. But next episode, we're going to be going into nutrition school. Okay. We're going to break down the nuances of nutrition. We're going to understand micros and macros and calories and what happens and how do we lose fat and how do we do all these things. But I just wanted to kind of set the stage and really prepare you to be motivated to understand those things in the next episode because of just the kind of dismal situation that we're actually in, and how if you're not educated in this world, you're just like, you're leaving too many things to chance with your health. So I hope you got some things from that. I appreciate you. Thanks for listening. I'll see you on the next one.
All right, that's a wrap for today's episode of the Health is Hard podcast. I hope you found some valuable tips to help you on your journey to a healthier, more fit, more resilient version of you. Remember, building a stronger, healthier you takes time, and I'm here to support you every step of the way. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe, leave a review, and share it with a friend who could benefit from the goods that were in this one. Be sure to check out the show notes for resources and a special offer from our sponsor, Element X Health and Fitness. As a listener, you can get my free 83-page Chiro Companion Mobility Guide when you visit elementxhfc.com. That's Element X, H as in health, F as in fitness, C as in culture. If you have questions, suggestions, or just want to connect, find me, Dr. Matt, on Instagram and TikTok at Dr. E Health, DRE Health, and Twitter at DREX Health. Let's keep this conversation going. Thank you for being part of the health and fitness culture we're building together. Keep putting in the work, stay consistent, and cheers to making health a little less hard today.